Welcome, everyone. We're going to take just a minute and allow everybody to connect before we get started. I hope everyone is enjoying their Tuesday afternoon. This is a lunch and learn session, so I sure hope you've come with a snack, maybe a sandwich. A few housekeeping items while we wait. If you're looking for your Zoom controls, take a look either directly at the top or bottom of your screen. We have turned off microphones for this session, but we do encourage you to please utilize the chat feature. We will have moderators on this event, so if you submit a question, I guarantee that the advisor who invited you to this presentation or someone else from our office will respond with an answer to your question. Give it just another second. So again, thank you all for joining us today for our presentation, The Power of Zero, Tax-Free Wealth Building Strategy. You're really in for a treat today. We have three of our big hit players presenting today. The first half of our session will be led by President Andrew Stafford, and it will be followed up by an interview between our CEO, Carrie Lawing, and our Vice President, Heather Renfro. To kick it over, if you have not had an opportunity to work or know Andrew Stafford, today is going to be a treat. He really is a genuine and charismatic presenter, but more importantly, his background in business paired with his passion for finance and people allows him to be a dynamic strategist for his clients and for Prevail. So there is no one else to better show you our fundamental strategy, the power of zero, than Andrew Stafford. Take it away, Andrew.
Thank you, Susie. Again, I'm Andrew Stafford, President of Prevail. Our mission at Prevail is to challenge the status quo, to educate clients on their options, and to shout from the rooftops that we believe traditional financial advice is wrong and there may be a better way to save for retirement. I'm very excited to share today's strategy, The Power of Zero, about transitioning assets into a tax-free environment. I've used this strategy for myself, my friends, and family, and I think you'll find today is a great opportunity to learn there may be a better way. So let's talk about our objectives. We're going to discuss retirement planning saving options. We'll explore the pros and cons. We're going to go through pitfalls of traditional retirement planning. At the end, Carrie and Heather will talk about real life examples and how this could work in your world. And most importantly, as always, we're going to educate all of our clients as well as you with us today on alternative retirement planning options. Every situation is unique. That's one caveat we understand. We build custom solutions at Prevail based upon a thorough analysis driven by your specific goals. So while today is a super high level, what we're asking you to do is think about strategically, does this make sense for me? And if so, talk to the advisor that invited you today. Let's start with a quick review of the three most traditional options for retirement savings. The tax-deferred bucket. We're going to break this down into three different buckets. That consists of your 401ks, your 403bs, IRAs. For some, it may be the defined deferred comp plans, pension plans, cash balance plan. There's a multitude of different ways that you can save for retirement in the tax deferred bucket. The key takeaway is that no matter which vehicle you use, you are deferring the taxes to a point in time later in life where you will pay income tax at the rate of which you withdraw it. The second bucket, the taxable bucket, this is our general checking account. Could be savings accounts. A lot of times we will refer to this as a brokerage account. You'll always know which one this is because you will get a 1099 at the end of the year on the income that this account produced. But in short, you've already paid taxes on it and you're only being taxed on the income. And the last bucket is tax-free. Tax-free basically refers to Roth, Most recently, a lot of 401k plans have added the Roth contribution option. Super important. Check with your current 401k provider to see if that's in there. And if it is, take advantage of it. Muni bonds sometimes are, sometimes they're not tax-free. You got to be cautious about that. And then the last one is to what we'll refer to as the LIRP or the LIRP. Now, what are we all educated to do? If you talk to your CPA towards the end of the year, you talk to your advisor, we're all told that we need to increase our deferral in the tax-free bucket. We're told get your adjusted gross income down to the lowest possible rate, pay the least amount of taxes that you can today, and save in the tax-deferred bucket. But isn't that really just kicking the can down the road? The second form of savings is the taxable bucket. And a lot of times we'll have things that save there, but primarily that's for your emergency cash. And the tax-free bucket, while everybody likes it and understands it, the common investment vehicle in that bucket is Roth. And for many people, they either phase out of Roth or they can't put enough into Roth to really make a difference for their retirement savings. So whether it's intentional or not, what we find is as we take a step back, the vast majority of our retirement savings ends up in that tax deferred bucket. And for many of our clients that walk in our doors, it's 80+%. And again, that's because we're all told that is what we should do. So let's really examine what that advice means. As we look at the tax deferred bucket, the taxable bucket, tax free, let's go through the rules. I don't find it unusual that the tax deferred bucket has the most amount of restrictions and rules associated with it. When we look at withdrawal penalties, IRS reporting, RMDs, contribution limits, Social Security, whether or not it will or won't be taxed, all yes in the tax deferred bucket. But the most important thing is, again, you'll be taxed at ordinary income at the point in time when you take it out. When we get to the taxable bucket, much less rules. Really, we only have the IRS reporting on the income that is produced. Our Social Security still probably will be taxed on this as this income comes in retirement, but for the most part, you're paying the capital gains taxes on the income that it produces, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Then we get to the tax-free bucket, and maybe you have some IRS reporting whether or not you, depending on the investment vehicle, but there's no tax on it because again, you've already paid the tax and it's the tax-free bucket. So what does all of this mean and what is one of the biggest pitfalls? Well, I don't find it ironic that if the IRS is going to allow you to defer taxes now that they've put all these restrictions on it. But the early withdrawal penalty is the one that just jumps out at me. If the majority of our savings is in this bucket, it's in essence illiquid. How many times have you thought about, man, if I could only tap into that for this, whatever this may be, and then you thought, well, I'll have to pay all the additional penalties and taxes, etc. The required minimum distributions is critical as well, because ultimately the IRS says to you, if I'm going to let you defer the tax on this, I'm going to make sure I get it back. And so when you turn 72 under the new guidelines, IRS guidelines, they are forcing you to distribute assets out of your tax deferred bucket in order to get the taxation back. And all of that is nowhere near as important as the fact that the majority of your retirement income is subject to future income tax rates. Does anyone really think tax rates will be lower in the future? Because that's ultimately the question that we have to ask. If you believe tax rates will be lower in the future, it probably makes sense to have the majority of your assets into a tax deferred bucket. But if you even remotely think they'll be higher, aren't we really kicking the can down the road? And ultimately, who controls that? It's not you. So let's take a look at the top marginal tax bracket from a historical standpoint, because I think it's really important for people to understand that we are in a historically low tax environment today. I'll bet you wouldn't think that. So as we go back and we look at the mid 40s, highest top marginal tax bracket in the history of the United States, 94%. And from that time, taxes have come down. And as you'll see, they've trended down pretty consistently, except for a few short periods of time to today, where the top marginal tax bracket is at 37%. And if we took a trend line and ran that across, it goes to tell you that we're in a historically low tax environment. But yet when I talk to clients all the time, they'll come back and I'll ask, how do you feel about current tax rates? And they'll say, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm taxed to the hilt. I can't believe how much I pay in taxes. Then we show them this and they're surprised to think about, wow, taxes are historically low. But more importantly is to think about taxes as it relates to our national debt. And the red trend line that I put on here is the growth of our national debt overlaying our historic tax rates. And what I find amazing is as we started to lower taxes, you can see the red trend line, which associates national debt, start to climb. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only reason that the national debt has increased. There are a multitude of really sophisticated issues that go into how our national debt is figured, how we collect it, how we accumulate it. But what I find very unique, when we overlay these and you think about tax rates coming down, the red trend line going up, look at what happens in the 90s when we actually raise taxes from one of our most historically low time frames. The red trend line starts to plateau. And then we begin raising taxes again and it skyrockets up. Now, we have had historic wars recently. We've had the 08-09 financial crisis. So again, there are significant impacts to our national debt. But the question that I have for you is, how do you think this impacts you? In late 2019, the federal debt was at $21.5 trillion. Where do you think it's at today? Fast forward just 12, 18 months, where do you think it's at today? $26.6 trillion. We've added $5 trillion to the national debt over the last year. Now, we've had a significant economic chaos and impact that's recently happened. But at some point in time, this will have to be paid. Who's going to pay it? Let's transition to the impact of tax rates on your deferred tax bucket and or your 401k IRA savings. If you had $1 million that you'd saved for retirement and you retired in 1980, you would have been able to keep $300,000 of your $1 million. The rest would have gone in taxes because the top marginal tax rate was 70% at that time. Fast forward to 1990, tax rates got much better. It almost flip-flopped. You would have been able to keep $720,000. Think about the variability between before and after right there. You would have kept $300,000 to $720,000. I could tell you if I would have had a crystal ball, I would have worked 10 more years. As we keep moving forward, we come to 2019, top marginal tax rates 37%, not terrible still. You would have been able to keep $630,000. The question for you is, if the majority of your assets are saved in a tax-deferred vehicle, how much of your IRA is yours? Can you truly answer that? And the question is, are you willing to bet your future on an unknown? I find it amazing when I talk with prospective clients and others about their financial planning and the work that they do with their advisor. And there's a tremendous amount of great advisors out there, but I'll ask them one question. When you're doing your retirement planning, how often are you running different scenarios on what would happen to your income if there was a tax increase? The silence is as awkward as that. You probably already know the answer. It isn't happening. And it's the number one most important thing to consider when we're thinking about retirement income. So the question is, what do you do about it? The issue that we have is all the time we hear about portfolio diversification. And portfolio diversification is critical. It's very important. But very rarely are we taking that same concept and talking about tax diversification or how I will be taxed on my income. and making sure that I have a diversified approach to taxation. So as we go back to our buckets in the traditional process of the majority of our assets in a tax deferred bucket, what we work with clients on is how do we transition that to say, you know what, let's have a more balanced approach. Let's transition, instead of all of the assets in this tax deferred unknown bucket, let's get it to where we have options, where we take back some control instead of giving the control to the unknown. Now, the question I always get here is, Andrew, is 33% enough? I don't know, because I don't know your specific situation. Obviously, more is better, but if we can at least get it diversified, ultimately, when you go to retire, you have more options. What I'd like to do now is let's transition to an actual case study so you can see how the strategy actually works in real life. In this particular family, and this is an actual client of ours, in this particular family, they were doing everything that their previous advisors had told them to do. They were contributing the max for the husband and the wife, both working, to their 401ks. They had all of their traditional savings or their traditional emergency money tied up in their taxable bucket, but they had much, much more than they ever needed in there. They had additional accounts that weren't earning a good rate of return that had been passed down to them. And ultimately, they weren't looking at this holistically as to how all this works together. They were doing the things that they should do from a protection standpoint with their insurance, et cetera. So what we worked with this client on is, how do we transition assets? How do we do what you're already doing and making it more efficient? This strategy is very important because we don't sit down and talk with our clients about, hey, you need to either save more or spend more or add expenses or create an adjustment to your lifestyle. What we talk about is, how can you do what you're already doing more efficiently? So in this scenario, we lowered the 401k contribution down to the match. We always want to get the free money, but let's not make our problem of our 80% of our assets in a tax deferred bucket, let's not make that worse. So we lower it down to the match. We lowered the amount that they were putting into their emergency savings because they already had that. It wasn't gaining the level of return that it needed to. We redirected some of the insurance that they have because we've got that taken care of. And they had some other small accounts that needed to be managed more efficiently. All in all, we were able to reallocate about $50,000 per year from their existing assets, from what they were already doing. No change in lifestyle. So a lot of times people will ask, well, I can't put that into a Roth. I don't want to go into all muni bonds. What are my other options? And that's where we refer to what is referred as the LIRP, a life insurance retirement plan. Most of our clients love all of the aspects of the Roth. But what ultimately happens is they either phase out of it from an income standpoint, or as we've mentioned before, you can't put enough into it to impact your retirement income. So it's a great vehicle. It's no wonder the IRS gave us the option to do it, because your assets grow tax-free. You can pull it out tax-free, but they've limited everything as far as our ability to get into it. So what the LIRP does is it takes all of the aspects of the Roth, all of the things we like about it, and brings it over into a different investment vehicle. Now, what we do is we take a very small amount of life insurance and wrap it around the investment to get it within the IRS tax code of tax-free. And that's the ultimate goal. It's a very unique vehicle. It does have death benefit associated with it, but that's not ultimately the goal. There's other ways to get death benefit much cheaper. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're utilizing an alternative asset class that is liquid. You have access to it. It grows tax-free. You can pull income tax-free. And most importantly, it's a very competitive, predictive vehicle that is not correlated to the stock market. So when you have ups and downs in your investments, again, we're bringing in a de-risking vehicle that isn't correlated. So it has all of the aspects that people want, plus much more. So I'm going to transition now into how this works in real life. We're going to go through the actual illustration that we put together for this client. Remember, we transitioned $50,000 a year from what they were already doing, no change in lifestyle, into this particular vehicle for 10 years. At 10 years, this particular investment's fully paid up. Can't put any more money into it. If we wanted to do more, we'd have to do a different investment strategy. What this does for the client and why it is so important is that asset transfer actually creates almost $65,000 per year in tax-free income for them in retirement. Now, you may take a step back and say, well, I don't want to retire on $65,000, and neither do they. But they still have their 401k assets that they can pull from. They still may or may not have Social Security, depending on if it's around. And they've got some other assets that they will draw from. But what it does is it gives them options. It gives them the ability to have a tax-free bucket, whereas they didn't before. And as we talked about on the previous slide, it does have a death benefit associated with it. And if this particular client dies at, call it 87, he's got 1.186 million additional dollars for legacy and or creation for his children, wealth creation. So as we look at what did the reallocation of $500,000 do, it actually provided $1.3 million in tax-free income, plus almost 1.2 in legacy pass-through. That is an unbelievable vehicle, and the reason that we utilize this particular investment chassis referred to as the LIRP. Now keep in mind, as we've talked about before, this asset is liquid. It has no income restrictions. It has no limits on what you can put into it. It has no total age restrictions. So a lot of times people ask, am I too old for this? There are ways that we can work through that. So as we start to land the plane, the question that we have for you, let's examine the cost of doing nothing. You can continue your relationship with the IRS. Well, they will determine how much of your savings you keep. Or you can act now and take back control of your financial future. I'll leave you with this thought. No one really knows what tax rates will be going forward. But as you can tell on this slide, history proves to us that they will change. Remove the variability of uncertainty in your retirement planning. If you find yourself relating to any of the topics we discussed today, or you'd like to dive into your specific details of how transitioning your assets into a tax-free environment would work, please contact the advisor who invited you today. Thank you very much. I'm going to kick it over to Carrie and Heather.
Good afternoon. I'm excited to spend a few minutes today talking with you guys and probably one of the people that I enjoy most spending time with, Heather Renfro. Heather, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So Heather and I have worked together 22, not quite 23 years, and we're here to share some of our experiences and thoughts as it relates to both Power of Zero and some of the things we've got to both learn from clients and some of the time that we've gone through this process with them. So Heather, I'm glad we could talk a few minutes and share some of our experiences.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
So we've just heard from Andrew talking a little bit about both Power of Zero and kind of real life situations. I want to have a few questions, and we don't have to stick to these thoughts, but some things that I thought were kind of important. So one of the things as we are thinking about this today in our dialogue, why do you think that most people haven't necessarily heard of either Power of Zero, that concept kind of before?
Well, the concept's actually been around for a really long time. So, businesses, CEOs, high net worth individuals, they've used the process for a really long time. We've just made the strategy more mainstream. I think, Carrie, if you look back compared to history, I think 2020 really stands out. I think people are going to start doing more research to help themselves avoid future tax rate risks. With COVID, the upcoming election, I think people are very aware of some of the unknowns.
So in my circles, and I think you're probably hearing some of the same dialogue, I don't know where we end up with all of the stimulus and all of the debt and all the things that go on, but we could end up adding 8 to 10 trillion to our national debt in 1 year. And most thinking people that I hear at some point believe it's going to have to be paid. And there's not a lot of options, right? I mean, as you look at it, we can't reduce expenses enough as a country to get there. So there's really not very many choices. Now, how and when, and I mean, obviously we can't answer that, but I think it's pretty likely that this will be a year people will remember, and likely there's going to be an after effect, a hangover from all these things that have happened.
Very much so.
So one of the things that comes up in the dialogue like this is, as we look at the various things that exist today, I agree with you. I think Power of Zero concepts have been around for a long time. I think the way that it's organized and presented makes it pretty crisp and easy to understand. Why is it necessary to use an insurance product as part of this?
Insurance products are kind of like Swiss Army knives. You know, if you think of it in terms of, if it's structured correctly, the cash accumulation will be tax-free. When you die, the death benefit is tax-free. You can use the money throughout your lifetime or during retirement, flies completely off the radar screen of the IRS. And last but not least, I mean, consider just, you know, the liquidity options and it not being exposed to market conditions. There are a lot of reasons why we specifically use the life insurance chassis.
So it's moreover the platform and what it allows for, not the label, right?
You're absolutely right.
And one of the things, I'm a bit older than you are, so since we've worked together that period of time, one of the things that I view differently today that was not that important to me, probably even 10 years ago, is the critical illness part of the death benefit. I have got so many people in my group, and I'm 56, so I've got a lot of people that have had health problems and things that make you contemplate that differently, that at 40 to 45, from either a critical illness or long-term care concern was not the same. Are you hearing that today in your groups?
Oh yes, often hearing about it. I think people are starting to get to the age, Carrie, in my generation where we're starting to have to care for whether it be parents or grandparents. And I think it's making younger people very aware of that outstanding risk. So if you think of it in terms of, you know, a hybrid type approach where you're able to, you know, have that policy in place, and, you know, if you pass away peacefully in your sleep one night, you know, your heirs will get the tax-free death benefit. If you need the money during your lifetime, you know, for long-term care type purposes, they'll accelerate that death benefit and you can use it while you're living.
Yeah.
Tax-free.
Really good point.
Yeah.
So one of the things that comes up again in my multiple discussions and have for some time is many people have other advisors. And a lot of people don't develop net worth without having people maybe as an investment advisor, an insurance advisor, sometimes accounting. Frequently people will say something like, listen, this platform's not going to have what you're looking at, a high rate of return. How would you respond to that when that's in line with trying to understand, get all the benefits, but the return doesn't match up with some of the things they could do today?
That's interesting you asked that, because we don't try to chase equity style returns inside of a LIRP strategy. So when you think about the LIRP strategy, I have taught my clients that you almost think of it in terms of more like a de-risk portion of your portfolio, a fixed portion. So, you know, if you have a bunch of equities already in your plan, this could be your volatility buffer. This could be the one thing that doesn't necessarily fluctuate with market conditions.
So maybe said differently, by it being the financial foundation, it allows them to have equities work the right way. There's this idea that people go into markets at the wrong time and make emotional decisions, but really what it is they don't have enough money in the safer, more conservative categories. By doing that, it allows them to build, and I'd use my adjective, maybe not yours, but a better portfolio.
Yeah, with guarantees.
Yes,
yeah.
So interesting. So I want to change topics just a little bit. So there are a lot of different styles of products out there today, and this is under the category of some things that seem too good to be true sometimes are. And I'm not going to use, we're not really, products aren't where we get hung up, because there's a lot of things that can be used a lot of different ways, but there are styles of products today that I'm pivoting to they make people think like they're owning equities, but it isn't. It's in a different platform. And so I'm going to start with that and see kind of what your comment would be, because there's a lot of people that are looking for a free lunch and it doesn't really seem to exist, but I want to know how you feel about that a little bit.
I get that question actually quite a bit, whether it be from clients or other advisors. What I always advise is, if they want equity style returns, buy an equity portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
Don't mix strategies. There's no reason to bring in a separate strategy where you may be more in search of equity returns than you are maybe that tax buffer. In our opinion, my view is that when we have one side of the LIRP that's guaranteed, it allows you to potentially be more aggressive with other investments because you have that solid guaranteed volatility buffer in place. So I don't advise to mix the two strategies. I advise to definitely stay on the guaranteed side when you're looking at your options.
And to be fair, generally an insurance type product doesn't perform like an equity portfolio over 10 or 15 years. Now it'll have some components of it, it has the feel and look of it, but it's not an equity portfolio. So,
right.
So your advice is let each asset class do its job and don't try to make one look like the other.
That's right.
Okay. So one of the questions that also comes up, and I have owned what I'd say in my world are significant whole life policies for a long time, and one of the things that comes up, and by the way, this is a very unique approach and it's more the platform of it, not again the product, but one of the things that comes up that people will say, gosh, that platform can be pretty expensive. It can have a lot of internal costs charged to that. How does that work over time and perform in a way that it leverages the other things that I do? How would you respond to that?
Well, every type of investment is going to have some sort of expense built in, whether it be a investment account where you're being charged an advisory fee, whether it's trading fees, internal expenses. There's always going to be expense involved. However, the way that we structure our products is that typically you have those products fully paid for within the first 10 or 15 years. Then once you get beyond that point, you've prepaid all those costs and charges over time. Carrie, when you look at how long someone will potentially have this strategy in place, it could be 30, 40 years. And if you do the math or the division, it really is going to average out to about the same as whatever your investment account or advisory fee would be over that same period of time.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's no free lunch you're going to pay for whatever you're getting. It's a question of how you pay for it.
That's right.
So what about people that believe, to our comments earlier, as they're getting a little bit older, they're not as healthy as they used to be? There's some things that naturally come up. Do you think that really affects their ability to look at this kind of strategy and apply it?
It does, but if you take a step back, Carrie, the insured and the owner of a policy, that doesn't have to be the same person. So for example, if you aren't very healthy yourself, but you have children or a spouse, or even potentially a business partner, if you have somebody else that you could use as the insured, you could still own the policy and use the strategy. I think the interesting part when you start to use other insured, such as children, is that it could also set you up for some great legacy planning as well. So sometimes it isn't always right to have it on you individually. There are times when other people actually may make more sense.
So one of the things at Prevail that we believe is, by and large, the industry is somewhat broken. And in the period of time that I've been in the industry, everybody always focuses, in my view, and I think maybe you feel this way a little bit too, on the wrong things. And so for the longest time, everybody was focused on accumulation. The commercials on TV, they were as silly as what's your number or how much. And by the way, the efficiency of it probably was more important than your number. At Prevail, we focus on distribution planning, i.e. the topic today of how you can have income and wealth be efficient as an income stream. And then the last part is, what's your legacy? I think people are beginning to think about that a lot more, of what good do they want to do, and it could be for their families, it could be charities, but it seems like that Power of Zero allows people to deal somewhat with all three of those topics, right? From an accumulation perspective, a distribution perspective, and then ultimately, what do they want to have happen next that's important? How do some of the clients that you have talked to and taken through this experience, which has been a lot, how do you think they view those three in terms of importance in their own planning?
Well, customarily speaking, I think at the present time, everybody's very concerned about future tax rate risk. There are so many unknowns right now, and people work so hard, Carrie, to accumulate all of these dollars. And I think that the future tax rate risk really has people worried. Now, do they want to leave a legacy? Absolutely. And do they want to maximize the dollars they leave behind? Yes. But I think it's very scary, the situation a lot of middle-aged people are in at this moment, because, Carrie, they've been told all of these years, defer, defer, defer. If you want to save for retirement, put it in this qualified plan or this 401k, and you can defer tax to a later date whenever you're in a lower tax bracket. And so there's all these, I think, myths, that at some point they're going to retire in a lower tax bracket, when the reality is that they probably won't.
So there's probably, I can think of three, there's probably a lot of factors that affect that. One is that generally they don't have the deductions
Correct.
that they had when they were younger, whether it's children or mortgage interest. Two, or secondly, a lot of them are retiring with more income because it costs more to live than what they had planned on, which pushes the brackets up. And three, traditional planning said you always don't make as much and the brackets are lower. So if those two aren't true, you keep a lot less of your money than what you ever planned on.
Yeah.
And then I think when you throw it in today, the cost of living, just how much more expensive everything is compared to 5 or 10 years ago, I think it's difficult for people in retirement to not grasp that it's going to cost a lot more than they think.
And don't forget health care.
Well, and you don't even really know how to quantify that, right?
That's right.
It's so, well, Heather, thanks for spending some time with me today. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'm glad we could talk a little bit about this. You have been through this experience with a lot of people over the years. I felt like your both perspective and some of the clients teach us. Really, we get to go through the experiences with them, and it is really kind of interesting to go through both sides of that. So thank you, I appreciate it, and look forward to kind of visiting with some of you that were able to be online today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps it up for us today. Again, big thank you to all of our presenters, Carrie, Heather, Andrew, for taking the time. We at Prevail hope that you found value in this presentation today. If you have not already, I do encourage you to take a look at us on social media. There is a wealth of educational information out there for you, especially on our YouTube channel. Reach out to the advisor who invited you today if you have any additional questions or would like to learn about your own unique situation. We thank you again for the time you've invested, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, guys.